The idea of an M car may be changing, but I think with a little more effort and passion on BMW's end and a little more lenience and acceptance on ours, I think we'll still be able to enjoy them. That was 10 months ago, after I had driven the first electric car with an M badge on it. And slightly younger miles is right, things are going in that direction, but before that day comes, BMW is giving the enthusiast experience one last go. One more rear-wheel driven, non-electrically powered, manually operated sports car. The BMW M2... Actually, that doesn't sound too good. BMW M2, the sequel. Actually, no. BMW M2 squared. Actually, no, that doesn't sound good either. BMW M... Actually, everyone's just calling this thing ugly, so we'll stick with that for now. And today's video was sponsored by Brilliant.org, which is one of the best ways to learn math, data science, and computer science interactively online. We will get into that a bit more later, but for now, just know that Brilliant, I love you, dog. And yes, the design has certainly been a huge talking point with this car, but I think a lot of people are missing a certain perspective. We live in a time where it's almost normal to hear about the most insanely terrible things on the news. Gas prices are insanely high, most Marvel movies suck now, and social media is distorting everyone's perception of reality one BBL at a time. Does the design look worse than the last generation M2? Yes, but did they go completely off the deep end? I don't think so. You've still got this aggressive hood bump, the widened fender flares, and an overall sporty stance. The rear end is bad. I think we can all agree on that. But I feel like sometimes in life you just have to be happy with the fact that you didn't go with the worst case scenario. Now, granted, this rear end is bordering on worst case scenario, but I can live with it. I've had this car for like a week now, and I feel like it doesn't bother me as much as it did when I initially saw it in photos and stuff like that. I feel like pictures online definitely do this car an injustice. It's a much better looking car in person. I think you just gotta see one for yourself. I haven't had anyone who's seen this car on the road go, hey, that car's ugly. I think they're mostly just paying attention to the fact that it looks like a sporty new car from BMW. Also, keep in mind that cars that aren't perfectly designed are the backbone of the aftermarket industry, because now all these third-party companies can come up with even more BMW bumper replacements, so there are positives here. Speaking of positives, I think the interior of this car. With the last generation M2, you could spend over $100,000 on the most exclusive optioned out version of the car and still have a pretty cheap interior on the inside. But this new M2 actually feels premium on the inside, which is where you're gonna be spending most of the time when you're in the car, not staring at this. These sports seats are bolstery and supportive, yet still comfortable enough to drive every day. The few physical buttons there are in the center console area feel price appropriate, and whether you hate or love this new giant touchscreen in the car, you can't say it looks cheap. And I do miss the physical gauge cluster in the car, but I think it'd be pretty unrealistic for BMW or any modern sports car company to keep that around, I guess minus Porsche. It doesn't feel like any corners were cut. Actually, that's a poor choice of words. It doesn't feel like BMW cheaped out in here. So maybe the fact that the new M2 has a worse exterior and a better interior is BMW trying to teach us a lesson about appreciating things for what's on the inside and not necessarily being swayed by how things look on the outside. I feel like a lot of people could benefit from that lesson. So Chris Harris actually said the new M2 is brilliant. And you know what else is brilliant? Today's video sponsor, Brilliant.org. Brilliant.org is the best way to learn the maths and the computer sciences and engineerings interactively. Brilliant has a beautifully designed website with thousands of lessons that can teach you the basics of math, AI, data science, neural networks, and much more. And not just the basics, you can do the more advanced stuff too when you get to that level. I love Brilliant.org because I'm not brilliant, but thanks to Brilliant, I can take fun engineering lessons that allows me to learn more about the stuff I try to tell you about. And with my busy schedule, Brilliant fits perfectly into my day, like any man and a Porsche 911. It's one of the most effective and personable ways to learn. Trust me, dog. The Porsche GT3 having a 6-cylinder engine isn't what makes the car cool. It's about how that flat 6 engine makes you feel, just like the knowledge. It ain't about getting the knowledge, it's about how having the knowledge makes you feel. Knowledge. You want to achieve your goals, you want to be the best student you can be, you want to have the biggest of brains. Well, get Brilliant. You can try it for free for a full 30 days using my special link in the description below, or just visit brilliant.org/carswithmiles. And the first 200 people to sign up using that link will get 20% off Brilliant's annual premium subscription. Do it now. Don't be like me and not be Brilliant, even though I'm trying to get Brilliant through brilliant.org. Go to brilliant.org right now. Now, back to the video.
Brilliant.
This car is advertised as having 450 horsepower, and BMW, you're definitely lying about that. This car feels like a 500 horsepower car easily. And for a fact, I know it's 500 horsepower because shout out to Chris from Vehicle Virals. He put his M2 on a dyno, and it's a manual, by the way, and his was putting down 477 to the wheels. So when you account for drivetrain loss, that's over 500 horsepower to the crank. So yes, and it makes perfect sense. This car feels like a little pocket rocket. In just the blink of an eye, you'll find yourself in the triple-digit speeds on the speedometer. In Mexico, of course. If you're coming into this car from a non-competition version of the last gen M2, I feel like you're gonna feel every bump of that boost in power. And I feel like a part of that is because I've got the automatic. And yes, most enthusiasts would say, always get the manual, always have 3 pedals if you can. But I feel like in this particular case, you should go with the auto, and here's why. You see, there are manuals and then there are good manuals. And I think the simple fact of the matter is that the manual transmissions in the new BMWs just don't feel that good to drive. They're super notchy, they feel spongy, it just doesn't have that really good feel that you want out of a manual transmission. I feel like the engagement factor of having a manual transmission just doesn't make up for how less potent the car feels with the 3-pedal setup. I feel like the automatic just makes the car feel a lot more sharp and ballistic. And there is a part of me that misses the dual clutch transmissions for sure, but after driving this for a week, I feel like the 8-speed auto, I'm sorry to say, but I think it's just the better transmission. I don't know, the dual clutch transmissions in the last gen M cars were just not that great, especially for launching and things like that. Felt a little bit jerky at times. I feel like this gives you the speed, this gives you the responsiveness, it gives you the engagement factor, where if you have this car in the fully tuned up M mode, you can feel those shifts, especially in the lower gears, 1st through 3rd. You can definitely get a little kick in your back when you're shifting up and down gearbox. Now, something that a lot of people have talked about with this new generation of M cars is the steering feel. And yes, the steering feel in the M2 leaves a lot to be desired, especially when you compare it to BMWs of old. After driving this for a week, I certainly miss the traditional hydraulic steering rack, but that's unfortunately a thing of the past, and it's probably never coming back, so you kind of just got to get used to how these newer cars feel. You still get that heaviness and weight when throwing this car around and steering, but you can tell that a lot of it is artificially produced. Overall, it feels a lot more, I hate to use this word, but video gamey compared to the last generation M2. But I still feel like it's a fun car to drive and engage with. You're getting a lot of road feel through the wheels and tires. You can hear the rock chips flying up from under the car like a proper sports car. I think a lot of people question why this car exists, given the fact that it's barely lighter than a BMW M4 and slower. But after having driven the new M4, I can definitely say that the M2 feels a lot more like a sports car. It feels a lot more raw and engaging. I said this before when I initially drove it a few weeks ago for like a few minutes, but this is the M car I would buy between the M2, M3, M4. This is what I would want to have. I do wish I could have gotten the carbon pack for this car, which comes with a carbon fiber roof and carbon bucket seats. I feel like that would have really completed the experience for me. But these regular sports seats are good enough, I'd say. I think it's safe to say that they built these with the bigger guy in mind, which is why they don't fit me the best, but it's certainly comfortable enough for daily driving and certainly supportive enough for some spirited driving as well. I've thrown this car around a lot of corners and it's held me in place pretty well. One criticism of the new M2 that a lot of people have had is that it just doesn't feel as rowdy and as scary or aggressive as the last generation. And that's certainly true, which is why some people have called this car more of a GT, which I don't think makes much sense at all. But I personally like how much more confidently this car drives. It just grips and rips, like taking this thing around corners from a standstill. There's a lot of traction most of the time, unless it's wet, of course, with summer tires, which is the situation I'm in right now. It's still certainly possible to throw the rear end out when you want it, but it's not as easy to do so as the last generation car. But like I said, I personally like how confident this car is when taking it around corners and bends. And I think BMW made the right choice for going with a staggered wheel and tire setup for this car. And I'm sure a lot of its handling capability comes down to a lot of these electronic assists working their magic in the background. And sometimes I feel like tech in sports cars can be a downside to the overall experience, but I feel like it's been a net positive for the M2 as far as how capable the car is at the limit. You can go really, really fast and be pretty dang confident while doing so. I feel like BMW took note of what people experienced in the last car and tried to make it more approachable for the novice or someone who wants to drive this thing every day without feeling like they're getting beat up or having to constantly fight for traction. It's more of a daily driver than the last M2. It's not as raw as engaging, but I feel like it's a car you could actually use every day. If you're looking for a sports car that you can drive every day, the M2 fits the bill even more so than the previous gen, and I think that's what an upgrade is all about. Would you believe me if I told you it was only 1 o'clock in the afternoon? It's just super dark and cloudy because it's about to rain. So I'm gonna make this quick. On paper, the new M2 is heavier, safer, it's uglier, but I gotta admit, in the week that I've had this car and been driving it, I've put nearly 500 miles on this car. I've had an absolute blast. It's super ballistic in terms of acceleration. You can still let the back end slide out on you if you really want, especially with traction control off. And it's just been a really fun car to drive, and especially one that hasn't beaten me up when taking long distance drives and doing regular commute stuff with. And I've never ended a review with saying this before, but honestly, I kind of want to buy this car. I think a Brooklyn gray automatic with a carbon roof and some brown seats, I think that's my kind of spec. And I know a lot of the reviews have probably led you to believe that this car isn't that good, but trust me, I think you should just drive one for yourself. And I think at the very least, you'll have fun while doing so. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe for future content like this. And more expensive BMW stuff coming soon, as well as other car reviews. That's about it. Talk to you guys in the next one.
I like this little cutout, this little
like
thing.
The signature M thing, the fistable wing mirror.
Yeah, I know, you know? So I like that too.